So let's see what the news has in store for us this week. Top UK news stories for the past 7 days. Government accountability and transparency concerns. We've had quite a lot of this over the news over the months. Several independent outlets, including Byline Times, Open Democracy, and Novara Media, have focused heavily this week on government transparency issues. Their reporting highlights concerns about restricted access to public interest information and the broader climate of hostility towards oppositional voices in the UK. These outlets emphasise how draconian libel laws and increased censorship pressures have shaped the media environment. Well, yes, we've discussed this over the last few weeks. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, it was all about mainstream media and how we've lost faith in mainstream media, which we have. So the fact that several independent outlets are drawing our attention to it is good. That's if you're on social media. Unfortunately, I would say unfortunately, but a lot of people aren't necessarily on social media. And if they are on social media, there's still a tendency for the algorithm to funnel what it would like you to see. So when you're on social media, you're being directed to look at things regardless of what your thought patterns are. And that is because they want you to think in a certain way. If you aren't on social media at all, if you're one of the very few people who has no social media at all, then all you're resorting to is mainstream media. And that's completely captured, as we know. So draconian, yes. Libel laws and increased censorship pressures, yes, because that's happening right the way across the alternative media platforms when it comes to social media. Investigations into abuse of power. TruePublica and other independent platforms continue to publish investigations into abuse of power, corruption, and political influence networks. These stories often explore areas that mainstream outlets underreport, such as lobbying opacity, conflicts of interest, and the erosion of press freedom. Well, we know about the erosion of press freedom from the DSMA video that I did. Do look that up if you haven't seen it yet. It's quite an eye-opener. Lobbying opacity. Well, I'm not sure if you've followed me for long. If you have, you'll know that over time we have looked at issues when it comes to who is lobbying our government. And there was a petition looking at the influences of different foreign agents on our government. And there was a particular country that had been highlighted, and a petition went forward. And the petition was to look at the influence of Israeli lobbying in our UK politics. And the petition reached the required amount of signatures to garner a response. And it also exceeded the amount of signatures that are required to have a debate in for the actual politicians to have a debate about it and to let us know. And our politicians have acknowledged that there were enough signatures, but have refused to debate it. They have said that they will not be debating the aspect of Israeli presence in our UK politics. So that's not gone down very well. So it doesn't surprise me when it comes into the investigations into abuse of power. So erosion of press freedom, the lobbying, underreporting, mainstream media underreporting. It's like a pressure cooker that is building up over these issues, and I can see that it's going to pop soon. Coverage from left-wing alternative media. Outlets like Double Down News, Evolve Politics, The Canary, Squawk Box, and Novara Media have spent the past week covering cost of living pressures and their disproportionate impact on working class communities, critiques of government welfare and policing policies, Labour Party internal tensions, especially around policy direction and grassroots dissatisfaction. These platforms consistently frame stories through a structural inequality lens. Cost of living pressures, we've discussed this over the last couple of weeks when it's come to what's happening in Iran, and our government quite happily blaming all of our problems and all of our pressures that we're experiencing in the UK on that war. And my argument is they've done that so many times before. The cost of living pressures are high, and we know that with the oil crisis at the moment, petrol prices are very high. We also know that that affects the fertilizer pricing. So from that aspect, our food prices are increasing as well. So that's putting a great deal of pressure on the general citizens in this country. And my argument over the last few weeks of looking at it has been that our government tax us to the hilt. And then they kind of double tax us by VAT as well, on top of the original tax. So if our government felt anything for us citizens about the cost of living pressures, especially the impact on the working class communities, then they would do something about the taxation. Critiques of government welfare and policing policies. Today, and it will be interesting to see if this comes up on AI, today the police won a High Court judgment that they're able to utilise live facial recognition within London is the area that they've designated. But if it's going to be happening in London, then it will happen all over the country. And this is the very start of the creep in of live facial recognition, and gait analysis, I would assume, will come into that as well. And they're saying effectively that if you've done nothing wrong, then there shouldn't be a problem. But we know that that doesn't work that way. And there are a lot of people where the police have used facial recognition technology who have been falsely accused and have been hauled in over things that they haven't actually done. Labour Party internal tensions. Well, there have been quite a lot of tensions in the House of Commons over Mr. Starmer, who I refuse to call him sir because he doesn't act like a sir, who has been lying quite blatantly about the Mandelson situation, but has been lying about a lot of things. And he was called out in the House of Commons. And when I was watching that being televised, it was on X, actually, on the House of Commons. You could tell by the look in his party's faces that they weren't best pleased with his conduct and weren't very happy either. However, he hasn't resigned yet. Let's see what happens by next week. Centrist independent outlets spotlight democratic integrity. Byline Times and the London Economic have focused on electoral fairness and misinformation, the influence of billionaire-owned media on public opinion, the UK's declining press freedom ranking, which they argue affects democratic accountability. Their reporting this week continues to highlight systemic risks to democratic institutions. I would say that our country is moving away from democracy and is really moving towards dictatorship. Everything that's being put in place when it comes to under 16s being banned on social media and couching that as we have to look after our children, the health of our children. The roundabout face of that is if you are over the age of 16 and you want to access social media, you're going to have some form of verifiable ID in order to be able to do that. So that's a roundabout of getting the digital ID in. So there is a general sense that we are having things placed upon us that weren't ever part of Labour's mandates. Things that they said, things that they were elected on, have completely fallen by the wayside, and we are being dictated to as to what we can do, what we can't do. Our right to protest has been crushed under Labour. Our right to have a fair trial with a jury is being crushed under Labour, and none of it has been consulted with us. We haven't made those decisions. We haven't said that's what we want. And in a democracy, we would have fair say. But these measures are being placed upon us. And for me, that makes it a dictatorship. Electoral fairness and misinformation. We have the local elections are coming up in the next couple of weeks. There's been lots of door knocking from all of the different parties. However, they're all different cheeks of the same backside. And we now know that our elected puppeticians are not the ones in charge. Whoever gets into power, even if Starmer is forced to resign, whoever gets into power will not be in charge. Influence of billionaire-owned media on public opinion. When it comes to the media is totally captured. So we know you can look at the different alternative medias that I've shared with you. I've done a video on different media that you can utilize that isn't captured by billionaires, isn't owned by billionaires. But we know that Elon owns X, and therefore the algorithms are in favor of what he would like. We know that Mr. Ellison owns TikTok, so everything is funneled in the place that he would like you to see. So yes, definitely captured. And the UK's declining press freedom, we've covered that with the DSMA. Right-wing alternative media narratives. Platforms such as Guido Fawkes and Westmonster have emphasised immigration policy failures, criticism of government spending, concerns about free speech and woke cultural politics. These outlets often frame stories as evidence of establishment incompetence or ideological overreach. I would agree, but I wouldn't say I'm left-wing, I wouldn't say I'm right-wing. I don't, all the time that media is trying to put you in the box of left-wing, right-wing or centrist, they're ideally wanting you to fight amongst yourselves. So the right wing will fight against the far left, the centrists will fight against the right and the left, where they're trying to divide us. They're trying to get us to fight with our neighbours. And I would argue the people we should be fighting are the puppeticians that are in positions of power. Summary table, we don't really need to go through that. Here we go. See, again, left wing, centrist, right wing. So we won't go through that. So that was Copilot. Let's see what Claude has for us today. So here is a roundup of notable UK news stories from the past 7 days. Top of the heap. UK arms shipment to Israel seized in Belgium. Now, I did see this on social media. Two shipments of military components bound for Israel from the UK were seized in Belgium following an alert issued to Brussels authorities by Declassified UK. I highly recommend you follow Declassified UK. They are a very, very informative outlet. Belgian NGO Red Daskite and the Palestinian Youth Movement. So all three of those issued alerts to Brussels authorities. So it was Declassified UK, the Belgian NGO, and I'm not going to try and pronounce that again because I'll get it horrendously wrong, and the Palestinian Youth Movement. A specialist engineer who searched the cargo found fire control systems and spare parts for military aircraft. The Walloon Regional Government named one of the companies involved as Moog, a US aerospace firm with a factory in Wolverhampton, which manufactures actuators for the M346 aircraft used to train Israeli pilots. Trade Minister Chris Bryant was subsequently exposed by Declassified for misleading Parliament about the shipment. We are not supposed to be shipping arms or components to arms to Israel. And from what I can remember, Chris Bryant is the person who gives the go-ahead, the okay for any shipments that go. So the fact that he's been exposed just goes to show you the level of corruption that we have in our government and in our government systems. Number 2, UK universities paid private firm to spy on pro-Palestine students. This is from Algeria Investigations. A private security firm was paid £443,943 between January 2022 and March 2025 to provide intelligence to UK universities on student activity, using an AI-powered tool to harvest a vast range of sources on the internet. The UN Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Peaceful Assembly said the use of AI to harvest and analyse student data raises profound legal concerns. The University and College Union called the spending shameful. I would say it's shameful as well. That's outrageous. The fact that we're spying on our students to see what they're getting up to, and they paid that amount of money. That's outrageous. And it says that it's come from the universities paid a private firm to spy. So who directed the universities to do that? Because I can't quite think why they would do that off their own back. That's an awful lot of money to spend. So where is that directive coming from? Something to consider. Resident doctors' strike hits National Health Service. The BMA Resident Doctors Committee announced 6 days of industrial action from the 7th to the 13th of April 2026, following months of intensive talks with the government, during which the BMA rejected a proposed deal and refused to put it to members for a vote. Critics at the Canary argued the dispute reflects a broader government strategy of underfunding the National Health Service. We've discussed this. It's interesting because Claude is showing me things from last week, or the week before last, actually, 7th to the 18th of April, where today is the 22nd of April. This is Wednesday. It will be going out on YouTube on a Sunday, but I'm being shown stuff that we've already covered because I covered the doctor strikes before. So I'm unsure why Claude's doing that. Reform UK candidates under scrutiny. Again, this is from the 13th to the 17th, so a little more up to date. Multiple investigations this week targeted Reform UK ahead of local elections. Byline Times revealed that GB News commentators presented on air as ordinary members of the public were not identified as having political affiliations. Separately, Kemi Badenoch suspended a Conservative candidate for North Harrow after Byline Times uncovered a series of offensive messages he had posted online. Not surprising at all. The fact that the GB News commentators had not highlighted their political affiliations doesn't surprise me either. I used to follow GB News. They have a YouTube, and I used to follow them. And I would watch and I would work out that they were being incredibly biased. One of my favourite presenters is still, I think, on GB News. And his name's Neil Oliver. I follow him on YouTube, but I stopped following GB News. I started following GB News because Neil Oliver was on it, and I thought that that was probably a good advert for the channel. However, I would watch and I would find that the bias was really off the scale. There were particular interviews where if the interviewee wasn't following their line of bias, then they would talk over them. And I found that to be quite annoying to start with, but then just really bad over time. So I stopped subscribing to them. I stopped following them on YouTube, and now I just follow Neil Oliver, who I still find to be really very good, actually. He's, if you haven't checked out Neil Oliver on YouTube, check him out. He's good. Point 5, Nigel Farage's policy chief linked to Peter Thiel network. An investigation revealed that James Orr, Farage's new head of policy, serves as a key ideological link between Palantir's Peter Thiel and Sir Paul Marshall's GB News. So, Palantir, can't stand Palantir. I can't stand the fact that they are using Palantir as a targeting system in the US for all of the illegal wars that they're fighting. I think Palantir should be out of our National Health Service. And the fact that Keir Starmer had a quiet private meeting with Palantir arranged through Peter Mendelsohn in order to get them and have the contract for them to handle all of our data in the UK really is very annoying. Point 6, declassified. BBC shows strong pro-Israel bias among bosses. New data published by Declassified UK indicated strong pro-Israel bias among BBC senior leadership, adding to ongoing debate about editorial independence at the corporation. We spoke about BBC. I've told you that there are lots of people who have decided they're not going to pay their license fee. So I think the BBC have lost quite a lot of revenue when it comes to keeping their heads above water. And I also saw there was something posted on social media about the fact that BBC decided to do a documentary on how bad anti-Semitism has become in the UK. And I think that's probably a very good example of the bias for the pro-Israel cause, the strong bias for the pro-Israel cause. But I can't forgive the BBC. I've never really agreed with the BBC anyway, but when it came to the Jimmy Savile thing, them knowing for so long and doing absolutely nothing about it, just kind of put the icing and the cherry on top of the cake that I thought the BBC was shit anyway. So yeah, so that's it from Claude. very much from a health and well-being point of view, unless you just get really agitated about the amount of deception that we have in our politics, which I do. Let's ask Grok. Let's see what Grok has to say. Here are the top UK news stories from Grok. Starmer's Mandelson vetting scandal dominates politics. Isn't it interesting that Copilot didn't bring this up and neither did Claude? But Grok goes straight in there. The ongoing fallout from Prime Minister Keir Starmer's appointment and later sacking of Peter Mandelson as UK ambassador to the US has intensified, with accusations of poor judgment, withheld information on security vetting, and possible Epstein-related concerns. Starmer faced parliamentary grilling, admitted the appointment was a mistake, blamed Foreign Office officials, leading to the sacking of top civil servant Sir Ollie Robbins, and rejected resignation calls amid jeers and laughter in the Commons over claims of a rock-solid process. There has been a lot of coverage on this. When I said earlier about seeing his party sitting behind him with stony faces, looking very happy, that was when this was happening. I think the interesting point of this is there was a chap from Reform who called him out and called him a liar, said that he was a liar, and the Speaker of the House told him to take it back or he'd throw him out. And the chap turned around and said he couldn't lie straight in bed, which I thought was excellent. Not that I agree with Reform or their policies or anything else, but so Reform called him out, called him a liar, and got chucked out of the House of Commons. Now, we know that Starmer has been lying, so it's very interesting that the people that are calling him out are being thrown out of the House of Commons, but the liar himself isn't. And then the Zara Sultana from your party, she stood up and said effectively that on behalf of her constituents, she wanted to let Starmer know that they all know that he's been gaslighting them and that he has lied, and that treating us like we're stupid effectively is not the right way to go. And she got thrown out as well. The Speaker stood there and threw her out because evidently you're not allowed to use the word liar in the House of Commons, which, considering all politicians lie, I think is really quite rich. So it was interesting to watch. It was interesting to watch. Alternative coverage highlights Labour's MP turning on Starmer. Like I say, they looked all very stony-faced sitting behind him. A dismissive attitude from number 10. Yeah, it's like he's clinging on for dear life. Nobody in the country likes him. Nobody in the country likes him. But he's determined he's not going to go. Calls for his resignation as support crumbles ahead of local elections. So like I told you, our local elections are in a couple of weeks, or next week. I think it's a couple of weeks. And yeah, I mean, he tried to shut down some elections. I think he has managed to shut down some local elections, but I can't see Labour winning many local seats. Starmer allegedly pushing for another disgraced aide, Matthew Doyle, in a diplomatic role. So he's trying to get another disgraced aide into a diplomatic role. It beggars belief. It really does. It's like how bad does it have to get for you to realise that you're doing a really crappy job? Like, he had a horrendous 2025. I mean, one of my shorts went up and I said about what a horrendous 2025 he had. And I said it's because he's so shit at his job. And the 2026 hadn't started very well either. And it got thousands of views. And you would think he would take the hint, but he isn't. Rising inflation and economic pain from the Iran conflict. UK inflation rose to 3.3% in March, up from 3%, driven by surging fuel prices as the first official data reflecting the impact of the US-Iran war and related Middle East tensions hits households. Analysts warn of further spikes in borrowing costs, potentially 16 billion, eroded fiscal headroom for Chancellor Rachel Reeves, higher food prices, and risks to growth. We've covered this. We covered this on Copilot. Any excuse. They could sort the taxes out. Alternative outlets like GB News, I wouldn't class them as alternative, considering they're so pro-Israel, stress the severe hit to the economy, with households facing pressures on pensions, inheritance tax raids prompting withdrawals, and broader warnings of recession risks or prolonged cost of living strain tied to the conflict. Here we go. Surge in anti-Semitic arson attacks on Jewish sites in London. We discussed this last week, and I said that it could be false flags. And I said it was alleged. I said that it was my opinion. This is not truth. This is what I feel in my gut is happening. And I said that there were two sides to this. That the false flags would garner sympathy for Israel and would also frighten Jewish people in this country to possibly move to Israel. They were the two flips of the coin that I could see Israel gaining from false flags in our country. So we'll see what Grok has to say. A series of suspected arson attacks targeted synagogues in Harrow, Kenton, Finchley, and Jewish-linked properties, ambulances in northwest London. Counter-terrorism police are investigating possible Iran-linked proxies or paid criminals, with arrests made and the chief rabbi warning of a sustained campaign of violence and intimidation against the Jewish community. A teenager pleaded guilty in one case. This has drawn attention in independent reporting for its escalation amid wider geopolitical tensions, with police probing reconnaissance and links to other incidents. I can't for the life of me, understand how they can link Iran to these attacks. Makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense at all. Iran are after wiping Israel off the face of the earth. They don't have a problem with Jewish people at all. They have a really strong Jewish contingent in Iran. As far as I'm aware, on whatever their ministerial board is, they have Jewish ministers on their ministerial board. They have synagogues in Iran. They have churches in Iran. They are very free with their understanding of other people's religions and their rights to follow those religions. So it's very interesting that for some reason the UK is trying to link Iran to these arson attacks. Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense because they're busy bombing Israel. Well, there's supposedly a ceasefire, but somebody should tell Israel that. Looming local elections. Labour set for heavy losses. Reform UK rising. Reform is just the other cheek to the backside. They are no better than Labour. They are no better than Conservative. They are no better than any of the parties that are out there. And over social media, whenever I've seen anything that's been posted about politicians, lies, pro-Israel influence, I've just put power to the people. Together we rise. Disband UK government. And I think that's our only way forward. I really, really am at the point where I believe that the only way we as citizens can actually move forward is to disband our government completely and start afresh. Let's see what Grok has to say. With English local elections approaching in early May, polls and projections show Labour facing a potential wipeout, defending many 2022 seats, while Reform UK is expected to take major gains, potentially controlling councils in areas like Essex, Norfolk, and Suffolk, and surging in the red wall. Greens are also projected to advance significantly. The Greens are doing really well. I don't really know very much about the Greens because, like I say, don't really do politics, don't really take any of them seriously. They're all captured. Here in Gateshead, this is a Labour ward. Labour have held the North East really quite tightly for a long while. It will be interesting, and I will bring it to you to let you know who gets pulled back in our local elections, see if it's Labour again. Would be interesting if they lost up here, because Labour really do have quite a good representation in the North East. So alternative courage, e.g. GB News, frames this as Starmer's support crumbling and highlights issues like alleged Labour vote rigging charges in Croydon. Reform is closing gaps in places like Wales too. We'll see. We'll see what happens. So let's get on to our other notable stories. Brexit EU reset concerns. Starmer wants us to go back into the EU. We had this last week. Fears that Starmer's push for closer EU ties could lead to bans or restrictions on traditional British foods like chips and cakes in trade deals. Oh dear. Oh dear. This is a notable mention, evidently. Chips and cakes might be restricted or banned even. Chips and cake. Government spending and waste. Reports of Labour spending millions on delayed hospital projects, civil servant payouts and other taxpayer costs amid economic pressures. Well, delayed hospital projects, haven't heard anything about that. I know they're trying to garner up as much money as they can to be able to spend on defence, which again makes me laugh. Home Secretary controversy. Shabana Mahmood reportedly unleashed an X-rated rant at a white Liberal heckler accusing her of copying reform policies. I haven't heard about that. Broader critiques. Novara and similar outlets discuss government moves against sustained protests, internal Labour issues, and questions around liberalism, protest rights in the UK. I brought that to you last week. The fact that they've basically put it through on the policing bill that we're not going to have the right to protest. We can protest, but if the police turn around and say, oh no, you've protested 6 months ago and we had to arrest a load of people, so you can't protest now. They have the right to do that now, evidently. But come the revolution, we'll see exactly whether that works or not. So nothing really from a health and wellbeing point of view, unless you're just pig sick of our government, because it's all about our government. There really isn't very much else because of the corruption that is going on, the lies, the gaslighting. It's absolutely dire at the moment. But that is the news for this week.